Okay, this week's Parsha is Parsha's Terumah, and it talks about the building of the Mishkan, the building of the sanctuary. And I'd like to make a comment on a technical aspect of the first important verse in the Parsha. God speaks to Moshe and says the following: Daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel, v'yikchu li terumah, and let them take for me an offering. Me'es kol ish asher yidvenu libo, from every man whose heart motivates him, tikchu es terumasi, you shall take my portion. Now, the problem is this, that the first half of the verse speaks of the Bnei Yisrael in third person. Speak to the Bnei Yisrael, and they shall take for me a terumah. They shall take from me a portion. And the second half of the verse says, from every man whose heart motivates him, you shall take the portion. So God is speaking to someone in second person. So the meaning of the verse seems to be like this: you have the donors, and you have the people who are receiving the donations. So God tells Moshe to transmit the following message: speak to all the potential donors, and they should set aside a portion of their wealth for this offering. The mere fact they set it aside doesn't mean that you should accept it. Now, you, Moshe, and Aaron, and whoever else is in charge, you should make sure that the person who's giving it is giving it wholeheartedly. So therefore, me'es kol ish asher yidvenu libo, from all people whose hearts motivate them, you should take the offering. So there are two commands. There's a command to the donors. The donors should set aside a portion, and the collectors should ascertain that the donors are giving this willingly, and from the people that are truly generous, they should take it. And the truth is that the Targum Onkelos, the translation of Onkelos, really bears this out. Because although the same verb is used, the yikchu and tikchu, Onkelos translates each differently. In the first instance, he says, v'yafrishun kodamai afrashusa, which means they shall separate for me a portion. And then in the second instance, the translation is tizvun yas afrashusi, you shall take my portion. So again, the first command is a command to the donors: set aside a portion of your assets. Will it be accepted? That depends. The collectors now will determine, are you giving it wholeheartedly? If you are, then they can accept it. Now the question you have to ask is this: I mean, if the person already is voluntarily setting aside the portion, like, what more do you have to ascertain? I mean, the person is coming and he's saying that I've set this aside for the sanctuary. He didn't have to come. He didn't have to set aside a portion. It's all voluntary. So now you have to inquire further. Are you really giving it willingly? Maybe not. And he's giving it voluntarily. Why should I question him? And the answer, of course, is very, very simple. That there are many reasons people give. People give because of pressure. Sometimes you have a collector who is very persistent, and he can even pester you a little bit, and it's just easier to give than to say no. But that's not good enough for the Mishkan. The Mishkan had to be comprised of donations that were genuinely given of free will. And therefore the mere fact that a person comes with his donation is not enough. Moshe, Aaron, whoever was in charge, would have to ask the person to ascertain, was it given freely? And only then could it be accepted. So the nadivus, the voluntary nature of the giving, was very, very important. Let me share with you an amazing maral. The maral says a fascinating thing. He says the purpose of the nidavos, the purpose of the donations to the Mishkan, was to atone for the people's wealth. Now, this is a strange concept at first glance. Because we think that a person needs an atonement because he's committed a sin, perhaps. So he needs an atonement. Perhaps his soul, perhaps his body, but the atonement is, the cleansing is of the person. The Maharal says no. That if you've sinned with your wealth needs cleansing. You have to cleanse your wealth. You have to atone for your wealth. So the Jews made the golden calf. First they sinned, but they sinned with their wealth. So their money has to be sanitized. The money has to be purified. How was the money, how was the wealth that was used for the sin of the golden calf to be purified? Through the donations to the Mishkan. So the Maharal asks the question, well, if so, it should not have been a voluntary thing. It should have been a tax in proportion to the amount of wealth the person had. A very rich person should give a larger amount. A poor person would give a smaller amount, maybe with a fixed percentage, 5%, 10%, whatever. And then, if it's a fixed percentage, the more you have, the more you'll give. Because why is it voluntary? So the Maharal says an amazing insight. The Maharal says it really is that way. The more you have, the more you give. The less you have, the less you give. But how much does a person really have, says the Maharal? What it says in his bank statement, that's what you really have? In other words, if Reuven's bank statement says he has $100,000 in the bank, and Shimon's bank statement says he has $5,000 in the bank, so does Reuven have more than Shimon? Not really, says the Maharal. Because you have as much as you think you have. Because if a person feels that he has a lot, he has a lot. If a person feels that he has little, he really has little. Let's say you go to a person, and the person, again, on his bank statement, on his balance sheet, it says he's a multi-millionaire. And you come to him and say, I'm collecting for a very worthy cause. If you give $100, it would really help. And the guy says, $100 is a lot of money, can't afford it. So you tell yourself, he can't afford it. He's a zillionaire, he can't afford $100. He doesn't have $100 to spare. He really doesn't have it. It's a nebuch. Maybe he's not thinking straight. But from his perspective, he really doesn't have the money. Because to the extent that he believes that he needs every penny, he does not have $100 to spare. This man has no discretionary income. He has nothing to spare. Why? Because that's what he genuinely believes. He believes that despite his millions, he cannot afford to give this $100 donation. He doesn't have it. On the other hand, you go to the person who's of much more modest means, and that person feels he does have the $100 to spare. He really does have it. He has it. If he really believes all he needs is $4,000 and he has $5,000, he has an extra $1,000 of discretionary income. In a sense, he's richer than the other fellow. The other fellow can't spare a nickel. He has $1,000 to spend. So really, says the Maharal, what you have is not a function of what it says in your balance sheet or what it says in your bank statement. What you really have is what you think you have. And therefore, it's true. Really, the rich people give more, the poor people give less. But the true measure of wealth and poverty is not the bank statement. The true measure of wealth and poverty is what you feel you can give. So the person who feels he can give more will give more. The person who feels he can give less will give less. And that is an accurate reflection of what the people have. An amazing, amazing psychological insight, the Maharal says. But in any case, this is an important thing, that the contributions to the Mishkan must be a free giving. It must be a function of what in Hebrew is called nedivus. Nedivus means free giving. Yes?
Maybe it's a translation, but it strikes me in this whole thing that the verb to give is not mentioned. The verb to separate, in one situation separate, in another situation Moshe Rabbeinu takes.
Right.
Nobody's given.
That's right. In other words, that's how the verse is phrased. Obviously, if Moshe is taking, he's not forcing people to give. He's not stealing it from them.
Right.
He is taking what they are giving.
But they don't.
But at that point, at the point that they've separated it, Right now, the ball is in Moshe's hands. Moshe has to decide whether to take it. It's not a question of their decision to give it. Even if they want to give it, Moshe is not going to take it unless he knows that they're really giving it freely. That's the idea the Pasuk is saying. Now, it's a very interesting thing that this is so important, because we find that there was another collection that was made from the Bnei Israel, which was for the purchase of the sacrifices. And this was the Machzis HaShekel. Last Shabbos, of course, was PARSHA Shkolim. We read that section as the maftir. If you missed it, you're going to have a chance 2 weeks from now. Parshas Kisisa will be the weekly portion. That there's a mitzvah that every Jew give a half shekel to the sanctuary for the maintenance and the purchase of the korbanos. Here it says that ha'ashir lo yarba v'hadal lo yamed. The rich person is not allowed to give more. The poor person is not allowed to give less. In other words, it was not a function of generosity. It wasn't a free gift. It was a tax. Everyone had to give. You couldn't give more if you wanted to. You know, I don't know how it works here in Canada, but in the United States, there is a provision, if you don't feel you've paid enough taxes, you can make a voluntary gift to the government and direct it towards deficit reduction. I don't know of many people who do, but perhaps there are some that wish to do that. Here, it wasn't even allowed. Even if you wanted to give more, you weren't allowed to. A rich person could not give more. The maximum was a half shekel, and a poor person couldn't give less. It was a mandatory tax. So it's a very curious thing that on the one hand, the contributions for the building of the sanctuary had to be voluntary. On the other hand, the contributions for the maintenance of the sanctuary and for the purchase of the sacrifices had to be fixed. There was no element of willingness or generosity at all. It was a compulsory tax, and even the amount was fixed. So how do you account for the difference? Another interesting thing is this. When Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash, this is many, many hundreds of years later, how did he raise the money? How did he do it? How did he put together the funding for building the Beis HaMikdash? The Navi tells us that he raised taxes. It was compulsory. And this is a very curious thing. We know that rabbis always base their ordinances on Torah precedents. Chazal say, "Kol tikun d'Rabbanan kein d'Oraisa tikun." Whenever the rabbis make an ordinance, they always fashion the ordinance, they model the ordinance after the Torah law. So if in the Torah law, the contributions for the building of the sanctuary were voluntary, we would have expected that Shlomo HaMelech, in building the Beis HaMikdash, should have followed the same precedent. And strangely enough, he didn't. Strangely enough, here it was compulsory. He taxed the people for the money and materials for building the Beis HaMikdash. So why did he not follow the Torah's precedent? Okay, let's put that last question in the back burner. Let's start with the first question. I think by analogy, we can answer the question very simply. The difference between the contributions for the building of the Mishkan and the contributions for the korbanos. The following way. Let me give you an example. You go to a Jewish wedding. So, under the chuppah, the rabbi or an honored guest reads the ksubah. So what does the ksubah say? You think that the ksubah is a document wherein the couple professes its love for one another? Not quite. The ksubah really is a legal document which outlines obligations that are enforceable in a bezdin. These are the rights that the husband has that he can demand of his wife, vice versa, the rights that the wife can demand of her husband. It's all in Aramaic legalese, and the terms of the ksubah can be litigated in a Jewish court. Hardly seems to be the type of thing you would want to read at the wedding, under the chuppah. And under the chuppah you'd think how pure the love they have for one another is, and how beautiful and or romantic. I mean, the legalism seems to get into the way. The explanation really is this: that, of course, Chas and Kala, they're getting married, hopefully they love each other. If not yet, hopefully in the near future that will develop. But the greatest love is the willingness to obligate yourself, to commit yourself to do certain important things even when you don't quite feel like doing them. That's really the idea of marriage itself. To the people that ask the question, why is it necessary to get married? I mean, we love each other. Why can't we just live together in a state of romantic bliss? The answer is that'll work for a while. As long as you love each other, it'll work. What about the day that comes that you aren't particularly loving? The one will ask the other to do something and I don't quite feel like doing it. In the beginning, when everything is very, very, very fresh and new, so when the wife tells her husband to take out the trash, he says, "Oh, darling, anything, anything for you. I'll take out the trash to the end of the earth." But after time, you just don't feel like it. Who wants to take out the trash? That's when reality sets in. But there's more to this than romance. But the idea of a marriage is not just a profession of love. It's a commitment. I obligate myself in a binding way, in an enforceable way, in a way that can be enforced by a bid and by a court to fulfill my contractual obligations. That really is the highest form of love. So there's almost a seeming paradox that the marriage itself must be voluntary. The relationship must be entered into voluntarily. You can't have a shotgun wedding in Jewish law. The marriage itself, the kedushin itself, has to be something which is willing and voluntary. But what am I voluntarily doing? I'm voluntarily entering into a relationship where I am legally bound. That is the paradoxical nature of Jewish marriage. I am voluntarily entering into a relationship where I am legally bound to do what married people are meant to do for their spouses. So it's both. It's a voluntary relationship, but what I am doing voluntarily is binding myself legally. We know that the building of the Mishkan is compared to a marriage. You may remember the famous Rashi in PARSHA's Naso, where it says, "Biyom kalos Moshe lahakim es Mishkan." It was the day that Moshe Rabbeinu completed the building of the Mishkan. It's a very unusual word, kalos. Kalos means to complete, but it also is phonetically related to the word kala, which is a bride. So Rashi says that day, the day that the Mishkan was complete, Klal Yisrael, Jewish people, were like a bride marrying the Chassan. The Chassan is the Ribono Shel Olam, and the Kala is the Jewish nation. Okay. So the building of the Mishkan is compared to a marriage. A marriage has to be voluntary. You have to enter into the marriage voluntarily. But the ongoing maintenance, the ongoing conduct of the marriage is legally binding, even to the point of legal compulsion. So therefore, the building of the Mishkan, which is actually the initiation of the relationship, that has to be totally voluntary. And therefore, me'es kol ish asher yidvenu libo es tikchu es trumasi. The donations are only accepted from those people who are giving voluntarily. They have to want. You can't be compelled to enter into this relationship. But once you've entered into the relationship, and now we're talking about the ongoing maintenance and the bringing of the sacrifices, the upkeep, so to speak, of the temple, well, you've entered into that relationship, and now you're bound by it. And therefore, that is symbolized by the fact that the funding for the karbonos is a compulsory tax of the machzas hashekel. The rich can't give more, the poor can give less. It's obligatory, but that's the nature of the ongoing maintenance. The initial relationship is voluntary, the ongoing is compulsory. Okay, that's not a problem. We've solved that. But we still have a more nagging problem, which is, how do we explain the difference between the Mishkan that Moshe Rabbeinu built and the Beis HaMikdash that Shlomo Melech built? In other words, here we're also talking about the beginning of something new, the Beis HaMikdash. So if the Mishkan had to be voluntary, why did the Beis HaMikdash also have to be voluntary? Here we're not talking about ongoing maintenance. We're talking about the initiation. Now this leads us to a very, very important distinction between the nature of the Mishkan and the nature of the Beis HaMikdash. Now there's a contradiction in Rambam as to what the source in the Torah for the mitzvah of making the sanctuary is. In one place, in the beginning of Hilchas Beis HaBechira, the Rambam writes, it's a mitzvah, one of the 613 mitzvahs incumbent on the Jewish people, to build a sanctuary to God, and the source is the verse in our Parsha. Va'asu li migdash, you shall make for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti b'socham, and I will dwell in their midst. That's the basis of the verse. There's a Rambam in Hilchas Malachim, in the Laws of Kings, which says the following. There are 3 mitzvahs that the Jewish people were commanded to do upon entering the land of Israel. 3 mitzvahs. The first is to appoint a king. The second is to wage war against the nation of Amalek. And the third is to build a Beis HaMikdash. These are 3 mitzvahs that have to be done. And from the Talmudic sources, we see that they're done in that order specifically. First, the king is appointed, then war is waged against Amalek, and then the Beis HaMikdash is built. So where do we know those mitzvahs from? So of course, the mitzvah of appointing a king is the verse, Som Tasim Alecha Melech, you shall place upon yourself a king. And to wage war against Amalek is Timcha Zecher Amalek, to blot out the memory of Amalek. And how do we know you should build the Beis HaMikdash? So here the Rambam brings a different verse, not the verse from our Parsha, but a verse in Parshas Re'eh, which says, L'shichno sidrishu, you shall seek his dwelling place, uvasa shama, and come to that place. So the question that the Mefarshim are bothered by is that, which is it? Is the source the verse in our Parsha, V'asu li migdash v'shachanti b'seicham, or is the source the verse in Parshas Re'eh, L'shichno sidrishu uvasa shama? So that's a technical problem. What is the source of this mitzvah? But there's something else which is problematic. Then what does the Rambam mean when he says there are 3 mitzvahs that we're obligated to do when we come into Eretz Yisrael? You appoint a king, and then you wage war against Amalek, and then you build the Beis HaMikdash. Well, the mitzvah of building the sanctuary was even before the entry into Eretz Yisrael. The Jews in the desert built the sanctuary. So, what is the special mitzvah that comes only after appointing the king and after waging war against Amalek? As one of the 3 mitzvahs which we become obligated to do only when we enter Eretz Yisrael. I mean, even in the Midbar, in the desert, they built the Mishkan. So what is new in Eretz Yisrael? The answer is very simple. We know that the Mishkan was movable. The Mishkan was put up and taken down every time the Jews traveled through an encampment. It was set up again, then broke a camp, it was taken down again. The Mishkan traveled from place to place. In Eretz Yisrael, the Mishkan also traveled from place to place. First it started in the city of Gilgal, then it moved to the city of Shiloh, then it moved to the city of Nov, then to the city of Givon. Ultimately, it was brought to Yerushalayim, and there the Beis HaMikdash was built. Once the Beis HaMikdash was built in Yerushalayim, there is no possibility of the sanctuary being built elsewhere. I know some people would like to move it to Bnei Brak, but you can't do it. It's illegal, against the law. Because once the Beis HaMikdash was built in Yerushalayim, there is no other place that is kosher for building the sanctuary. This is its permanent home. That is really what the special mitzvah in Eretz Yisrael is. In other words, even while the Jews were in the Midbar before coming into Eretz Yisrael, there was a mitzvah of Asul Mikdash. You should have a sanctuary. It can be a portable sanctuary. You move from place to place. But there's a special mitzvah to make the final home, to designate the final place of the sanctuary. That mitzvah is only in Eretz Yisrael, and that mitzvah is only after you appoint a king, and after you wage war against Amalek. Then there is a mitzvah to designate and to build the final permanent Beis HaMikdash. A Beis HaMikdash that will preclude the possibility of the sanctuary being in any other place. Where does that new obligation come from? It's not from the verse in our Parsha. The verse in our Parsha would allow for the portable, movable Mishkan that goes from place to place. This special obligation to build the final, permanent home, that's a different verse. That's a verse in Parshas Re'eh. L'shichno sidrishu uvasa shama. That's why we have two verses. So the mitzvah of Asuli Mikdash is wherever Jews find themselves. They're traveling through the Midbar, they arrive in Eretz Yisrael, you should always have a sanctuary. But the special mitzvah of making the permanent home, that comes after you're fairly settled. You have a king, and you've already waged a successful war against Amalek. Now you can turn your attention to the permanent home. That's the other verse of L'shichno sidrishu uvasa shama. That's an interesting thing. If you look at these two verses, it's not just that one refers to the temporary sanctuary and the other to the permanent sanctuary. There's a very subtle difference in the way the two verses are phrased. Our verse says like this: V'asuli migdash, make for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti b'salcham, and I will dwell in their midst. In other words, what brings the Shekhinah, what brings the divine presence? To paraphrase the famous statement, build it and they will come. Right? You build the sanctuary and then the Shekhinah comes, the divine presence comes. V'asuli migdash, make for me a migdash, v'shachanti b'salcham, I will dwell in their midst. Wherever they make it. They make it in this stop in the Midbar, or this stop in the Midbar, or this stop in the Midbar. They make it in Gilgal, they make it in Shiloh, they make it in Nov, they make it in Givon, wherever they make it. V'asuli migdash, make a sanctuary, I will come and dwell there. The permanent home is different. The permanent home is different. There it says, L'shichno sidrishu, seek, go investigate, and find the dwelling place of the Shekhinah, uvasa shama, and then come to that place and build a sanctuary. It works the other way. Where do you build it? You build it in the place of the Shekhinah. Meaning there is a place, there's a place somewhere in the world, somewhere in Eretz Yisrael, which is the dwelling place of the Shekhinah. So we are commanded to seek out that place, find that place, and build a sanctuary there. So it's the exact opposite of the Mishkan. The Mishkan in the Midbar, the Mishkan initially in Eretz Yisrael, worked the other way. You build it, and the Shekhinah comes. When it comes to the permanent home, you are looking for the place of the Shekhinah, and you build it there. And in fact, the identification of the site of Yerushalayim as the Beis HaMikdash was Al Pi Navi. It was based on a prophecy. And what was that site? That site in Yerushalayim was a place that had great historic significance. This is the place where the Akedah took place. This is the place where Adam HaRishon brought his korbanos. Right? But more importantly, Chazal say, this was the place from which the creation of the world began. Chazal tell us there was a rack, there was a stone in the Kodesh HaKadoshim on which the Aron rested, and that stone was called the Even Shesiyah, the Even Shesiyah, which means the foundation stone. Shemimenu Hushtas Ha'olam. It was from there that the world started. Meaning when God started the world, He started from the center point, and the world expanded, and that was the central point. That spot was the central point. Yes?
So where's the exact prophecy that it was based on?
There, in the Navi, in Shmuel. Yeah. The Rabbi Eliezer, the story is repeated. So now it comes out like this, that place is really the place of the Shekhinah, the place of the divine presence, because it was the first place where God demonstrated a connection to the physical world. It was the place from which creation began. That's Shekhinah, that's divine presence. So the chashivus, the significance of that spot, comes long before the building of the sanctuary. It has a historical significance. So we are commanded, find that place, and that's where you build the sanctuary. Which is the exact opposite of the Mishkan. The Mishkan is V'asuli Migdash, make me a sanctuary. And the Shekhinah comes. Here, when it comes to Yerushalayim, find that place happened to be named Yerushalayim, and build the sanctuary there in acknowledgement, in recognition of the fact that this is the genuine place of the Shekhinah. So again, it's a very amazing thing that in the Mishkan, we build the Mishkan, we bring the Shekhinah. In Yerushalayim, we find the place of the Shekhinah, and we build our sanctuary there. It pointed out in the past that what is the idea of the Mishkan? You build the sanctuary and the Shekhinah comes. Now the Ramban says in many places that the Mishkan is the carrying forward of Har Sinai. Now, there are really two places where God, in a sense, connected to the physical world. There was Yerushalayim, which, as we said, is the place from which creation began. But there was another place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu descended, which was Har Sinai. He came down to Har Sinai to give the Torah. What is the Mishkan, says the Ramban? The Mishkan is the carrying forward of the experience of Har Sinai. It's the carrying forward of the experience of Har Sinai. When the Shekhinah departed Har Sinai had no sanctity, no permanent sanctity. Because Har Sinai was not the place which is intrinsically the place of the Shekhinah. It was a place where the Shekhinah came to visit, so to speak. So that Shekhinah which rested in Har Sinai travels along with us in the Mishkan, in all its travels, in all its stations. It's the Shekhinah of Har Sinai that travels along. The Shekhinah of Yerushalayim is not the Shekhinah of Har Sinai. The Shekhinah of Yerushalayim is the Shekhinah of Brias HaOlam. It's the Shekhinah of creation. It's the divine presence from the inception of creation. We pointed out a very interesting thing, that we know there were kruvim. There were angels, statues of angels in the Holy of Holies. And what is the significance of the kruvim? The kruvim really were God's throne, Ramban says. But the Ribono Shel Olam is called Yoshev HaKruvim. He sits enthroned on angels. So what does that mean? Because when the Nevi'im had prophetic visions of the heavenly throne, what was the heavenly throne made of? Not gold, not silver, not wood. What was it made of? It was made of angels. The heavenly throne was made of angels. And therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu was called Yoshev HaKruvim. He was enthroned on the angels, because this is how he was seen in prophetic visions. When the Nevi'im saw, so to speak, God sitting on the heavenly throne, he was Yoshev HaKruvim. He was sitting enthroned on angels. Now, in the Mishkan, the angels stood on the top of the Aron, on top of the ark. Part of the lid of the Aron, which was the Kapairas, was fashioned into the shape of two angels, and that's where the Shekhinah was. Meaning the throne, so to speak, was on top of the Aron. It was on top of the ark. When Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash, he fashioned two new kruvim, which stood on the ground. Which stood on the ground alongside the Aron. So it's a very curious thing. What does that symbolize? Why was it that the first kruvim stood on the ark and the new kruvim stand on the ground? Well, the answer is very simple. Because in the Mishkan, there was no sanctity of the place per se. It could be moved. It wasn't the ground that was holy. It was, you construct the Mishkan brings the Ashras HaShechina. So the throne is part of the Mishkan. The ark is the main component of the Mishkan. The ark is the basis of the throne. The throne of Kruvim sits on top of the ark. When it comes to Yerushalayim already, the place has a sanctity. Why? Because that is the place of the Shekhinah. The place of the Shekhinah is there. So therefore, where does the throne rest? The throne rests on the ground. That's why the Kruvim, which comprise the heavenly throne don't stand on the ark, they stand on the ground. The place itself is the place of the divine presence. Now it comes out a very interesting thing. It comes out that the Beis Hamikdash really is not something new at all. The Beis Hamikdash is the acknowledgement of a reality that comes long before the Beis Hamikdash was even a dream. And that's why it's different than the Mishkan. The Mishkan is doing something new. The Mishkan is bringing a new Hashras Hashchina. It's bringing a new divine presence. So as we said, anything new requires nedivus. Anything new requires something voluntary. So therefore the gifts for the Mishkan have to be voluntary. The Beis Hamikdash is not anything new. The Beis Hamikdash really is something very, very old. The Hashras Hashchina of Yerushalayim was there long before the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore it could be compulsory. Because it's the acknowledgement of a reality that existed long, long, long before. It's not to initiate something new, not to bring a divine presence. It's the acknowledgement of a divine presence. So in the same way that the korbanos, which are the representation of an ongoing relationship, were compulsory, Shlomo Melech held that the funding for the building of the Beis Hamikdash, since it's really the recognition of something that was there long before, was really something that was also to be compulsory. Now let's focus on this idea of the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash and the contrast between the two. It's a very, very interesting thing. Now, the Gemara says in Masechus Eruvin, we use two different words to describe the two. Right? We use the word Mishkan and we use the word Migdash. But the Gemara says a very interesting thing. The Gemara says, Ashkechan Migdash Tikvi Mishkan. Well, Mishkan Tikvi Migdash. We find that sometimes the Torah is not precise in its use of words, and it will use the word Migdash for the Mishkan, and will use the word Mishkan for the Migdash. Now, the place where we use the word Migdash for the Mishkan is really in our Parsha. It says, V'asuli Migdash v'shachanti b'sochan. Make for me a Migdash, and I will dwell in your midst. And subsequent to that, it's always referred to as the Mishkan. But in this one verse, the Mishkan is called Migdash. On the other hand, there's a verse in the Teichacha in Parshas B'chukosai, which says, V'nosati mishkani b'sochachem, I will place my mishkan in your midst, which is very odd. What does it mean, I will place my mishkan in your midst? The mishkan already was built, so obviously it's a reference to the Beis Hamikdash, and yet it's called mishkan. So you see, in that instance, the Mikdash is called Mishkan, which means that there are really two different concepts. There's a concept of Mishkan, there's a concept of Migdash, but each has both components. In other words, the Mishkan also has the aspect of Migdash. The Migdash also has the aspect of Mishkan, but the Mishkan was primarily Mishkan with a little bit of Migdash mixed in, and the Migdash was Migdash with a little bit of Mishkan mixed in. Now, what is the idea? What is the difference between the two? Now, the truth is this. The truth is that we relate to God in two different ways. Because we relate to God as being immanent, and we relate to God as being transcendent. Immanent meaning being close to us. Because we can speak to Him, He communicates with us, we care for Him, He cares for us. That's one aspect of a relationship. It's very, very, very close. Because we don't feel that God is distant, we don't feel He's an abstraction, we don't feel He's removed. Because we have a warm, intimate, close relationship with God. He hears us, He listens to us, He cares about us, He responds to our needs, He responds to our prayers. We give Him satisfaction. That's the idea of God's being immanent, God's being close. On the other hand, there's also another aspect of God which we have to recognize. God is not our pal. God is far removed. He's beyond anything we can imagine. He's beyond our grasp. He's infinitely great, removed from all human experience. That's God's transcendence. He's beyond. He's totally removed from us. When we relate to God ba'ahava, with love, we are experiencing His immanence. When we relate to God with awe, with reverence, with yira, we experience His transcendence. Another word for being close is shachen, shechina. What is a shachen in Hebrew? Shchenim are neighbors. And why are they shchenim? They live close to you. They're next door. They're friendly. You borrow things from one another. You share things from another. You do things together. Right? They're the shchenim. They're the neighbors. They're close. Mishkan is the idea of there's a place where we go to feel close to God, to experience closeness to God. That's the idea of Mishkan. Now, it's important to understand this idea, by the way. Let's go on a tangent for a moment. If I was to ask you, where is God? Where is God? It would be a theological error to say that God is here, God is there, God is in heaven. The very concept of location is inapplicable to God. To speak of God's location is what is called in philosophy a categorical error. They're applying concepts to God which are inapplicable to Him. Since God has no physical form or substance, you can't speak of God's color, you can't speak of His size, you can't speak of His mass, you can't speak of His location. Location is a quality of physical objects. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. But we can't speak of it. It's an error. It's just a faulty use of language.
Well, when you say God's presence.
That's the question. So what does God's presence mean? What is the concept of Shekhinah? Now, Shekhinah cannot mean that in some way God is here but not there. If God has no actual location, so what do we mean when we speak of the Shekhinah? We mean this, that there are certain places that are invested with a quality that when we are in those places, we feel close to God. We feel that our prayers are heard. We feel that God is watching over us. We feel that God is concerned with our well-being. That's the idea of Shekhinah. It's not that God is more here than there. But this is a place where we have the ability to feel this closeness to God. And to a certain extent, it's not to the extent that it once was, but the person goes to Yerushalayim, and he goes to the Kaisel, he goes to the place of the Beis HaMikdash. There still is this sense that you feel heard. Now, if you have something to tell God, that's a good place to do it. Certainly for many people, times at the Kaisel were very powerful religious experiences. Despite the fact that we've done our best to ruin it, in so many different ways. But nevertheless, Afal Pichen, even so, it still has the power of being very, very intense and lofty for those who take it seriously. That's the idea of Mishkan. Mishkan is a place where we go to feel close to God. If you look in the tefillah that Shlomo HaMelech composed when he dedicated the Beis HaMikdash, this really was the point that he talked about again and again and again and again. The idea of the Beis HaMikdash is that when a person has a worry, a person has a problem, he'll go to the Beis HaMikdash, this is where he'll daven, Hashem will respond. It's a place where we feel close. On the other hand, there's another aspect of Beis HaMikdash, which is that we want to feel a sense of awe, reverence. When we go to the Beis HaMikdash. When I mean awe, I don't mean fear of punishment, retribution. I mean to stand open mouthed, to stand in awe of the Ribono Shel Olam. That's what the Beis HaMikdash was meant to be. I can only describe it maybe by illustration. I remember many, many, many years ago, the first summer I was married, we lived in California, so we decided to go to Yosemite for a little trip. And we managed, by some miracle, to find a place to stay in the park itself, which is very hard. Normally you have to make reservations months in advance, but somehow there was a cancellation. We were able to get a cabin in the camp. And we arrived at night, and you couldn't really see much at all. It was like pretty much pitch black except for a few lights. We were in the cabin, and fine. In the morning I get up, and I walk out of the cabin, and I see we are very, very near this cliff, which seems to be like 1,000 feet tall. And you look up at this thing, and this thing is so massive, you're just taken aback. Just stand in awe of it. That's what the Beis HaMikdash was. The Beis HaMikdash was a place where you could stand in awe of the Ribbono Shel Olam. Because it's a place where the divine presence, so to speak, whatever that means, is there, you stand in awe of him. Because you perceive God as being transcendent. He's so far removed from human experience, from the mundane. He's beyond. Now there's a word for that. And the word for that is Kodesh. Kadosh. When we speak of God as being Kadosh, what does Kadosh mean? It's very easy to fall into a tautology. People will say, what does it mean to be holy? It means to be God-like. What does it mean to be God-like? It means to be holy. Yeah. Right? Obviously that's not a definition which defines anything. But what Kadosh is to be removed. Right? When a person is removed from human frailty, from human weakness, that person is a kadosh. So a person who controls his animal desires is called a kadosh. As a person who devotes his life to a higher purpose instead of the silly things that most people devote their lives to, that person is a kadosh. Right? God is the ultimate kadosh. Kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. Why? Because the Ribbono Shel Olam is totally removed from everything which is mundane, everything which is low, everything which is crass. He's transcendent. He's totally removed. He's totally beyond. So there are places we go to stand in awe of him, to perceive him as kadosh. That's migdash. That's the holy place. That's the place where we perceive God as kadosh. So there's Mishkan and there's Migdash. There's Mishkan and there's Migdash. The Mishkan in the Midbar was primarily Mishkan. There also was an element of Migdash. That's Chazal say, Ashkechan Mishkan, Dikri Migdash. It's also called Migdash. You could have that too. But its fundamental purpose was to be a Mishkan. In Eretz Yisrael, the permanent home was fundamentally Migdash. It was also a Mishkan. It had that too. It was a place where you could pray and feel close to God, but it fundamentally was a Migdash. How do you account for that? I think that's the difference. You see, the Mishkan, the temporary sanctuary, which brought the Hashras HaShechina, it brought the Hashras HaShechina in a historical time where God's involvement in the world was visible. Now think about the Jews in the Midbar, right? They experienced miracles on an ongoing basis. They ate the mun, they drank the miraculous waters of the Be'er, they were enveloped by the clouds of glory. Now they certainly had very powerful reminders of God's power, his omnipotence, his transcendence. What they needed was a place where they could feel a warm relationship with him, where they could pour out their hearts, where they could feel close. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'll give you a Mishkan. I'll give you a Mishkan. Now, a Mishkan doesn't mean that it's pure Mishkan. There's an aspect of Migdash too. But at that time, it was fundamentally a Mishkan. In Eretz Yisrael, it was very, very different. In Eretz Yisrael, no longer were there revealed miracles. No longer was there mun. No longer was there the Be'er. No longer were there an Anei Kavod. So no longer was there the opportunity to behold God's transcendence. So therefore, what we had in Eretz Yisrael was Migdash. We had a place. We came to the place of the Shekhinah, the place where God initiated the process of creation. And that became the Migdash, the place where we go to perceive God as transcendent. We daven for the restoration of the Migdash. What do we say? Shibana Beis Hamikdash B'Harav Yomeinu, that the Beis Hamikdash be rebuilt, V'sham Na'avadcha B'Yira, and there we will serve you with yira, with fear. It's an amazing thing. That's what we pray for. We want to have that experience. I'll share with you an amazing thing. There's a pasuk in Mishlei which says that Yiras Hashem Tosef Yomim, that the fear of God adds days to one's life. So there's an interpretation from the Sefer HaIkrim. Now the Sefer HaIkrim was writing 500 years ago, but he could have written this last week. He says like this: it's a known thing, he says, that people die from fear. People die from stress. If a person is scared of something, it can cause all sorts of harmful effects to the body, to the extent a person could die. He says there's only one fear that a person doesn't die from, which is fear of the Ribono Shel Olam. It says Yiras Hashem Teisef Yom. That's the only fear that adds to your life. If you're scared of dogs, you see a dog, all of a sudden, that's it. The adrenaline starts pumping, and the person, God forbid, could have who knows what happened. And it's a very dangerous thing. The Yiras Hashem, meaning to stand in awe of the Ribono Shel Olam, that adds to one's life, that makes one's life more rich, more meaningful, more fulfilled. And that's really what Migdash is all about. And therefore, it's an odd thing to say, why would we want to come and serve God in fear? It's true that to stand in the awe of the Ribono Shel Olam was a magnificent thing. If you speak to sports fans about the experience of going to a baseball game or a football game or a hockey game, etc., what makes it so pleasing? So, on the most mundane level, there's violence, there's competition, etc. But the people that have thought about this deeply say that there is something which is very, very appealing to a human being to behold excellence. To behold excellence. Because when you see people doing something well, something which is well executed, that is something which is very, very satisfying. And that's why people who think in those terms enjoy the types of sports that many people don't enjoy. So, for example, basketball, hockey, football, those are so fast, right? It's very, very hard to savor the excellence of it. Just things are moving so fast. I mean, it could be that the plays are very well executed and very precise, but it's very hard to dissect them. Baseball, on the other hand, I'm speaking as a true American, for whom today was President's Day, not Family Day, but as an American, so baseball is the type of game that the pace is slow enough that you can savor the strategy and the positioning of the players and so on and so forth, and you're standing and you're beholding a thing with excellence. There's people that watch the Olympic Games. It's the same thing. As you see individuals, not necessarily in teams, but individuals performing acts of excellence, right? To people that appreciate that kind of thing. And that's something which is very deeply satisfying. Something in the soul is aroused by beholding excellence. But the Ribono Shel Olam, it's certainly so. When a person reflects on the works of Ribono Shel Olam, the way he created the world, the way he manages the world, guides the course of history, so on and so forth, the sheer power. A person who reflects upon this and sees the excellence, sees the strength, sees the majesty, this is something which is, yes, we stand in awe of it. We stand in awe of its magnificent perfection, its complexity, its intricacy, how everything fits so well together. And I know everyone says, but there's so many things that aren't the way they should be. If the world was perfect, I would be rich. I would have a full head of hair. Okay, there are reasons for everything. But you still have to stand in awe of the fact that everything works as well as it does. I mean, if you read, a science textbook, a textbook in biochemistry, and you just have to wonder, how is it possible that the body could work as well as it does? It's an amazing thing. Even if a person is ill, and one thing seems to be going wrong, but at the same time, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of things which are going right. which is incredible. So it leads you to believe that it must be that there's a reason for that one thing which is going wrong too. Because otherwise, if a human being would make a device of such complexity, it probably would never work. Like, too many things have to work. It would be inconceivable. When you're talking about a thing which is comprised of millions and millions and millions and millions of elements, and there are some which are so critical that they could bring down the whole structure. So you stand in awe of the perfection. That's something which is greatly uplifting to the human being, to stand in awe and reverence for that. That's what Migdash is all about. This is a place which facilitates that type of perception of God. So we really have two things. Nowadays we have neither. We have no Mishkan and we have no Migdash. But we have replacements. Chazal tell us that Kala Eisek the Parshas Chatas, if a person studies the portion of the Torah about the carbon Chatas, Ma'ala Ola B'Kaso Kilo Hikrav Chatas. It's considered as if he brought a carbon Chatas. Kala Osek the Parshas Ola, the person delves into the Parsha of Ola, it's Ma'ala Ola B'Kaso Kilo Hikrav Ola. It's as if he brought a carbon Ola. That means that even things which we don't have the opportunity to do in practice, if we learn about them, or read about them, we can have a taste of the experience. So these parshas, the parshas of the Mishkan, are, parshas, they're very technical, a lot of details. Sometimes our eyes just glaze over. We can't relate to them. But the truth is, if we delve into them and think about them, reflect upon them, perhaps we can have a taste of what the Mishkan, what the Mikdash might actually have been.
Rabbi, you said that